So this is what is causing the problem, and there are underlying factors that are causing the problem, and I'm sure that as we go further, we'll be able to discuss it.
Okay, so I'm sure NADMO is very busy this time of year.
Yes, we are working around the clock to ensure that people are safe. So very busy, quite busy, working around the clock.
So the flooding that happened when it rained almost 2 days in a row, what exactly were your responsibilities in terms of helping those who were in a situation that they needed assistance?
Our responsibilities actually start before the rains. That is the early warning. Giving communities aware of impending floods and then what they need to do to ensure that they stay safe. And then after that, we pre-position our urban search and rescue teams in prone areas who will move in to assist when we have distress calls. And then after that, those who are affected are assessed, and then if there's a need for relief items to be provided, then they are provided.
Okay, so I wanted to just start right off the bat with what the president said, and he was very concerned about the behavioral issues associated with the flooding. And one of the things he said was that I will not allow the selfish interests of a few to jeopardize the collective future of the rest. And that while the government is going to do its part, we cannot overlook the negative effect of dumping of refuse into open drains by some unpatriotic citizens. How significant is this menace where we have this behavioral and attitudinal issue that crops up when it comes to flooding?
Well, it's very significant because it comes from indiscipline. We are not able to discipline ourselves, and it actually starts from how we use the land and our desire to be able to have infrastructure due to urbanization. That is the underlying problem of what we are having, in the sense that, you know, water is in a cycle when the rains come down, and it's all balanced when we have green fields, that is when you have a vacant land. So the rain comes, it seeps into the ground, some goes into the groundwater, and there's energy that comes with even evaporation. So all of this is in a balance. And as soon as we have urbanization, where we have hard concrete surfacing, we lose one component of it, which is the water to seep into the ground. Then the runoff becomes bigger. So land use management, which derives from land administration, and you know how problematic land administration is. These are the catalysts that is fueling our indiscipline in acquiring the lands. And you also have the situation whereby Accra and the urban cities are where there are a lot of economic activities. So everybody is coming into the city, and once they come, they need shelter. So with the need for shelter, they have to get a place to sleep, and what they do first is to get the land. And we have not mastered the culture of having master plans where development planning precedes actual development. So people go in first, settler goes in first, one building, no utilities, others will join. Then even as others join, there's no infrastructure. Even as they leave those sites, when the rain falls, they take the mud and silt on the ties. Then when they get to the main streets, it dissipates, and you know what, when the rains come, it starts clogging the gutters. So right down from how our development evolution is going, we are already creating the problems. Then we have a host of houses, the flooding issue starts, then the city is able to manage some money. They get in a design engineer, he comes in and puts the parameters in place, but it is constrained because the land is already occupied. So he does a little bit, it works. Then there's densification, like what we are having in cantonments and infilling of the government plots. And when those things happen, there's not the corresponding expansion of the stormwater ways. Okay. So with that, there's too much water now coming into the able to cope, and then the flooding starts. Already, remember, we have taken away the tree cover, and tree is part of it.
Yeah, we'll talk about all those things. I just want to stay with the attitudinal issues and talk to you, Mr. Yate. There was the June 3rd incident when it happened. I think a lot of us thought that this is going to really jolt all of us into awareness and say, hey, we need to do something. Even the attitude now changes. There was a story I read in that same time frame about residents along Asylum Down who were frustrated because they always seem to be at the recipient of the rainfall and the effects of the rainfall. And the picture that was shown, interestingly enough, just showed a lot of waste also in the drains. So my question to you, I'm sure NADMO has studied this many times, what is it going to take for there to be this attitudinal and behavioral change that we all need to have to be able to make a dent in this issue?
As we continue to sensitize communities on the needs of dump refuse, we also need to enforce the laws. That is why we're supporting the regional minister's call for cleaning of frontage. That is to make sure that all the drains are clean. Sometimes floods are experienced in communities and you realize that the major drains, that's the primary drains, are not overflowing. That means that the flood waters cannot find its way into the drains. Accra naturally is low-lying. All the waters from the mountains,
I think you call it downstream,
flow through Accra into the sea. And then we continue to deforest the mountains. Like you said, once the vegetation is gone, the flood waters flows down quickly. And then once it gets down to the plain, there are no drains to carry it. All the drains have been choked. So you go to drains. For example, sometimes the Odo is not overflowing, but some of the communities along the Odo Basin are flooded. So that is where the human distance comes in. We need to make sure that the waterways, the drains are always clear so that the flood waters will flow into the primary drains and into the sea.
And you also have a warning, I think. I read an article about people moving during floods and through floods.
We have been advising people not to walk through flood waters, not to swim, not to use flood waters. And sometimes people even not to drive through. Sometimes people think they have 4x4 vehicles so they can drive through. And then sometimes they end up the vehicles being washed away. Most of the people who drown during floods maybe try to walk through, cross the water, and they are washed. The current is so fast that it sweeps them off their feet. And then that's why we keep people not to walk through flood waters, not to swim flood waters, or even use flood waters for anything because it's contaminated. Apart from fecal matter and other domestic waste, sometimes these waters carry everything along its way, metals, wood, whatever, and it could injure you once you are in it. So we advise people not to get into it, apart from the contamination.
Okay. All right, so Mr. Kansi, the Minister for Works, and I think you might also be able to help with answering this question, he talked about the fact that this government has invested more than 450 million to expand the drainage system. So generally, what has this investment targeted, if you have some idea, and why are we not seeing the results that we would have expected, for example, when the Alajo interchange was done, something immediate, something that we can see?
Well, the evidence is what we see. So I cannot say for a fact in which particular areas these investments have gone into. Maybe they might have gone into studies, because studies are part of engineering. Maybe they have gone into some kind of designs whereby works are yet to begin, or some kind of maintenance works. But then obviously there's more needed to be done. Yes, more needed to be done. Yes.
Maybe you can enlighten us on.
When it comes to these structural measures to curb floods, NADMO is not involved in structural development that mitigates flood. Like when it comes to drains, and NADMO is not involved. What we do is that when we identify an area prone to flood, and our technical committee identifies the need for drains, then either if it's a secondary drain or a primary drain, we work with the urban roads who are responsible to get it sorted out to mitigate the floods. If it has to do with primary drains, like we have the Odo, then we have to work with the Hydrological Services Department through the Works and Housing Ministry to ensure that it is sorted out.
All right, so the president talked a lot about the MMDCs. Maybe the both of you can talk to us about what exactly is their role and what are they not enforcing that is perpetuating what is happening right now. I'll start with you, Mr. Okanse.
You see, the Local Assemblies Act empower the district assemblies and the MMDs to be able to ensure governance at the local level. So they are supposed to, it's like you're running an operation or you have a business. You have to see to it that people are complying with the laws that are set, and including laws. So there should be the situation whereby refugees from people's homes are being collected. They are providing minor drains or roadside drains, and that their inspectorate division are actually also penalizing the indisciplined ones who are doing the wrong thing. These are not happening enough. So people take things for granted, and they continue to do the worst things that is exacerbating the situation we have. So it's for the district assemblies just to enforce the laws. Yes, they have the power. There was a bit of inertia, so the president decided to kick their backs a little bit so that they can get to work. I hope it really pushes them to work, yes.
So, Mr. Yati, he said that they must enforce the laws, but one of the things the Minister of Work said was that they must enact bylaws to help curb the menace of people to drains.
But the bylaws are there. I always say that we don't need new laws. We have to enforce existing ones. And assemblies are responsible for land use. Before you use any land in Accra, or in anywhere, any part of this country, the district assembly must give you a permit. So they are responsible for land use. And even the quality of what you put, the quality control and assurance, it's all their responsibility to ensure that you do the right thing on the land. If you are permitted to build a residential facility, how you build it goes into it. It's all licensed the district assemblies. There are regulations that covers all these things. So when all these things are enforced, I think to a large extent we will mitigate some of these situations.
All right, so Mr. Kansi, let's talk now. We've talked a lot about the behavioral, but let's also talk about engineers. Because you look at some of the new roads that are being built. For example, the interchange that connects, runs all the way from Legon down to 37. And actually even 37, the Accra Mall area. When it rains, that whole place is flooded. And the question becomes, what are the engineers now doing during the monitoring and evaluation, during the developmental phase, to really look at all these factors when new constructions are being introduced into flood-prone areas?
You see, there is something about design, which is that there is a certain factor to allow for flooding on the streets, because and the streets sometimes, if others will understand, can also be used as a floodway depending on how you design your system. Because presently what we have to live with the flood. They are with us. So with the roads that are getting flooded is because, one, the roadside drains are silted, and I've told you they are clogged. I've told you how these things happen. It's either rubbish or from silt, which are coming from car tires that are coming from yes. So it means that there's no discharge way for the water when it collects on the road, and once the rains continue, then it gets worse. So I would want to refer to the situation in, let's say, Odo. You know, Odo always floods. I was telling my colleagues that Odo we should allow to flood, because it's going to flood anyway. So what we could have done during that nice project we did was to have sort of extended the ramps of the flyovers to the highest lines, because you know they are going over, the flyovers are going over, and have some kind of emergency systems. And like you could have also have storage buildings for the terminal, so that as soon as this flood water starts, we would have had an emergency system where people could go upstairs and go and seek refuge. And once the alert system kicks in, then we ask everybody, because it will be, the ramp will be across the highest flood line for the worst kind of or extreme rainfall. Then they will use it. So the emergency system comes in, then people will just go across it. After 6 to 9 hours, the waters are gone. So depending on the particular situation we have, I think that there are ways by which we can go around it, yes. But we should make sure that we are maintaining the gutters, make sure that we are desilting them consistently all the time. Once that for the first flash of water, those ones will go and it will not back up for the flooding to get worse. So maintenance is key. And
cleaning the sewer systems regularly is the function and responsibility of what entity?
Well, when you come to drainage, during construction, it could be the urban roads or the highways. Then during maintenance, the hydrological service has some role to play. But then, because these spaces are governed by the district assemblies, I would have expected that they would take the lead role in making sure that they collaborate with the hydrological service and ensure that these drains that are there are constantly maintained.
Okay, so there are some who believe that if we are able to create lakes and water bodies, Mr. Yate, that we'll be able to help with this issue. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, like the engineer said, we can create, we're able to create retention areas that will hold water and then release them. That they could help reduce floods in the city. But the problem is, we had dams. For example, if you go to Adenta area, there were lots of dams which are all holding the water from the mountains. What are we doing to the dams? People are buying them, reclaiming the lands without creating alternative ways. You know, you take space reserved for flood waters, you occupy it, you fill it, and you don't create channels for the water to flow. And if you don't direct it, you don't channel it, it will find its own way. So yes, when we're able to create such retention areas, it will reduce the menace of flood. But my worry is that dams that are playing that role
will be gone.
No, they're being taken away.
Yeah, people are buying. Yeah, they'll be gone. Yeah. In fact, is it true that Westlands used to be wetlands?
Yes.
And that has also been.
Yeah, those places have been encroached upon. But if we are talking about some of the solutions which are structural, like you talk about dams, now we have a treatment train, a management train for reducing flood waters, and it is actually to mimic the natural drainage systems. And it's, you know, I often also say that early in the morning we all get into traffic because we are all rushing and leaving at the same time at full speed, and we get to the junction and it's choked. It's the same with the waters. So it's all running from our homes that quickly, and back up, and then the flood waters happen. But during COVID, when we started our work patterns and people were staying at home, there was less traffic on the way. So it's the same situation, our analogy we can have for sort of reducing floods. And it starts with our homes. So we call it site control. So with site control, what you are expected to do is to harvest some of the rains. So you have a storage tank to harvest some of the rains. And that amount of storage that you store is not going downstream to add up to the waters. That amount of storage you store is delaying the water flowing down quickly. So we have storage control. Then within your site, as the building code requires you to have a certain portion of land to be green area, you are supposed to have permeable surfaces so that some of the water too can sink into the ground. So right down from your site, from each and every one site, will be gradually reduced the amount of waters that will be coming downstream. So after the site control, then we come to is rather source control. Then we come to the site control, because there are certain areas you cannot, it's waterlogged, it's clay, you can't infiltrate. So those ones you can let the water flow and get into the site control, where we can have these detention basins and also wetlands, and also have retention basins. Retention basins are basins that are almost always having water, but they can also take additional flood water. So there's some kind of measure, if only there's land available.
Well,
so all of this we can engineer and make sure it works, but then we will need land.
Yes, but even more importantly, when you say we need land, many of these new developments that are coming up are big in tiling all the surfaces. So to what adhering to this, have a green surface within the compounds to absorb the water?
So like you said, the regulations are there.
Implementation and enforced.
And see, most of the time, some of these things are also done on the blind side of the authorities. They are done, and we must, as citizens, endeavor to do the right thing. We don't always have to be pushed before we do the right thing.
Well, you know, we have a famous thing that says that what gets inspected gets done. You know, but anyway.
And some of it happens so quickly. Some of the development happens so quickly. And if we are not careful, the way it is going is not helpful to us. In the sense that now people are sharing plots of land into 3, 4, 2. And one person has bought the land, is going to make full use of it. And for those ones, they actually tarmacking all those places. So beyond, we have to come to housing, because I say that look at what TDC has been doing. We seldom report flooding situations. Some of the estate houses, we also seldom report flooding situation. Go to the mining concessions where they have estate which has been properly master planned and designed. You see that there's less frequency of flooding. So also on top of land use, we should look at having proper estate as housing, because when the individuals go in, your foundation level will be different from mine, because I have money, I'll feel to a higher level than yours. So before the design engineer even comes in to put the drains, some of the waters cannot pass because my level is higher than yours.
And also like to add to what do we engage professionals when we want in construction of housing facilities? Once people have money and land, they engage the services of a mason and start going.
But isn't that where the MMDCs, the district, the assemblies come into play to ensure that they have all these things in place before the building begins?
Most of the time, the documentation that goes to the assembly
has the right information.
Has the right information. And when it comes to the implementation on the ground, people want to cut corners, save some money. And then sometimes they have professionals endorsing it for them as if they are on site. But then to be a mason, but you have the professional who has endorsed the document as if they are on site. These are all the challenges that we need.
Okay, well, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. This is Talking Point. You are watching it on GBC and GTV, and our topic tonight is the flooding nuisance. Stay with us. development, and this has exacerbated the effects of urban flooding. Do you agree?
I do agree. That was where I started from,
okay.
Looking at the evolution of the flooding. So, you see, with rainfall, we are not having increases in rainfall. What we are having is rainfall intensity. So even though temperature is rising, rainfall is actually staying stable, but then it's somewhat shifting from June to October. At least in the last few years, I've seen October monthly rainfall higher than June. I think this happened in 2019 and I think last year too. So there's a shift, and there's also the intensity, and this intensity is how quickly the rain is coming, and this is what is actually what climate change is fueling. Yes.
Did you want to add anything? Otherwise we'll start.
Yeah, we also development. When we talk about development, going ahead of planning, because of the way our land tender system is, lands are sold, people buy them, and they start developing at the blind side of the city planners. So most of the time, the communities exist before the authorities move in, and it's very, very difficult planning communities which are already developed, creating channels for what, because there was no existing plan. Structures are put up anyhow with regard to waterways. So when the city authority goes in, it's a very difficult situation because you have to demolish structures. And then it's always a very difficult thing, demolishing structure. Sometimes you are taken to court and it takes forever.
Yeah, to be able to.
So these are the issues. Development ahead of planning.
So, solutions.
Solutions. Well, I think we said bits and pieces of it already. But then land administration for me is the first.
The biggest.
Yes. Then we should also look at estates, because once you have the planning and you do the construction in a uniform manner, certainly you make provisions for all of these things. Then thirdly, we should obey the president's order. Those ones that are illegal should go immediately. Those ones that the district assemblies, the MMDAs know that they are illegally sited, they should just mobilize their logistics, because I don't want them to also go and demolish and leave the debris there. So they should sort of mobilize the logistics, go and demolish them and take the debris so that it frees the waterway. So these are some of the things. They are actually the mechanics of the designs that we can do that can reduce the flooding. But for me, it starts with the land and the enforcement by the district assemblies to make sure that right from source we are harvesting rainfall, we are allowing water to infiltrate into the ground, we are having soak away, we are having infiltration trenches. So all over the world we have changed the methodology of what we call training the river. You know, the river has meanders and all of these things delay, but in the concept of industrialization, about what we call train the river. So you take away, you want the water to go fast. What happens? There's downstream flooding. So now we want to reverse the situation. We want to put in the meanders. We want to have in the small quabbles to make sure that biodiversity comes back. These are some of the things we want to do on the riverbeds that can minimize the flooding. So we have to go back to nature. So when you go to Europe, they will say that nature-based solutions. That's how they call it in Europe. Then when you go to America, they'll say low-impact development or green infrastructure. Then when you go to Australia, they call water-sensitive urban design. So meaning that we are accommodating the water because the water is part of us and we should make provision for it. So the actual methodological steps that we can take, if we all try to be disciplined, we can reduce the flooding downstream. Anyway, all of us are affected. We shouldn't think we are high up because you don't know where you will be when the floods occur.
Yeah. So
the level, it keeps rising.
Yes.
As the capacity narrows, reduces, the water can no longer find with the depth keeps increasing, keeps rising. So you can start by being high at a high level, But as the level increases, nobody can tell when it will get to your level. And then I also say that we should engage professionals. Especially during construction, we should engage professionals. When we engage professionals, they will know how to put up structures. They will know how to mitigate floods. So I would say is that we should engage professionals when we put structures. The engagement of professionals will reduce floods. Because you talked about estate houses and all that, and it's because they use the right professionals.
Yeah, so in one of some documentation from you, there was some non-structural solutions, which are policies, regulations, and laws. Some of the things you mentioned about in terms of low vegetation, natural, all those things will require some sort of national policy to drive it. To what extent do you think we are open or ready for something like this to be able to be implemented?
Well, there has been some policy initiatives already. So in 2015, we have the National Spatial Planning Framework, which sort of zones all the green belts and green belts, because now we also talk about blue and green belts, which is the blue belts being the waterways and all where the drainage passes. So there's that kind of strategy which is there. We also have the rainfall harvesting strategy. We even beyond the floods, sometimes we have droughts. We also have a drought management plan, and there's also the integrated water management strategy. So these strategies and plans are existing, but then we will need to put all of it as a flood. See, we should treat flood as a risk, so that the interventions we are putting in will be done against the risks, so that we can say that some of the technical terms, we have 1 in 2 year rainfall, 1 in 30-year rainfall. What is the risk of your structure be in such a situation? So we should look at risk planning rather than the current system whereby we just do anything anyhow. Yes.
So Mr. Yatta, you were talking earlier about education programs in terms of the behavioral, and I was wondering how that can be expanded. Maybe with NCC or something, because some of the today to even include the green vegetation, which is a requirement. I'm sure many people are unaware of that. So I was just wondering how, since we have established that that is a significant part of the issues we are having, the behavior, how will your campaign be intensified to be able to really effect changes in our behaviors?
Thankfully, we have offices, zonal offices in communities. So we need to intensify the campaign in the zones on behavioral changes. And I'm sure that these things are going to work at the end of the day.
Do you have neighborhood, not a neighborhood watch, but neighborhood organizations that, a community might come together and have some members who say this is what we are going to do to make sure that people don't litter, things like that? Is that part of the thinking?
Yeah, we work with, apart from our zonal offices in the communities, we have what we call the disaster volunteer groups in the communities. And then we work with the community, we work with churches, mosques, in our sensitization programs, market women, all groupings, social groupings. We try to engage them in the communities, to sensitize them on floods.
Okay. All right, let me take some questions and from viewers. This flooding is an attitudinal behavior. If all these buildings exist without human beings, would there be flooding? If no, then we should change our attitude. Also, there should be a law that prevents developers paving and concreting, like we talked about, in their areas, including the frontage of housing. The law should work. And then they also talked about the charges for permits are also very high, so a developer doesn't go in for inspection. Okay, that's the late General Kutua Champong said that Ghanaian is the cause of his own problems. The flooding nuisance is due in part to indiscipline on the part of those living and building just anyhow. Politicians, because of votes, are afraid to deal realistically with the indisciplinary aspects of the haphazard way of erecting structures in our city and our bigger towns. This is from Apia J in Sunyani. We're in a crisis. What crisis? We are all aware of this flooding crisis and it's alarming, but we are not ready to comply with the laid out programs. Why? So it goes on and talks about March is Ghana month, April sanitation month, so we can prepare our choked gutters and more. I'm so sorry, this is really not very clear, so let me move on. Where is the too much water coming from? Please ask the money, Batakari. We have to live with the floods. Wow, what are we preparing for? Rains by unclogging drains, decluttering gutters. The AMA and the other district agencies can and should be mobilized. Where the water is coming from?
Well, the water is coming from upstream, and
so tell them what upstream is.
Okay,
yes,
so
that
it's
is
coming from the higher parts of the landscape,
okay,
the hilly areas, and let me quickly add that because of the situation in Odo, the government of Ghana have a new project, Garrick, which is going to mitigate the situation within the Odo. And what I know, for instance, is that the consultants recommended 6 locations to have some sort of retention basins and detention basins, but they could only acquire 2. It's difficult finding the other 4 because the land utilization has people have taken over the land. So that is why I always hammer on land use and land titling. If we don't get those things right, yes, our challenges is going to be with us.
Okay.
Yes.
So, Doc, apart from Accra, the flooding nuisance is rife all over the country. Therefore, the education on the attitudinal and behavioral change must be given in a widespread manner through locally based media. Metro Department of Ghana should be able to purchase all their equipment in readiness for any uncertainty of rainfall disasters. And this is from Alhaji Dawuda Madina Estate. He also extends his condolences to the South African government and that country, same for Ghana. And Pascal says exactly what we've all been talking about. Pascal Jamoji, please, for how long have we been talking about this issue? They talk, and when the rains are gone, bye-bye. And that is probably how everybody feels. BBC, flooding in Accra predates the era of paving and tiling of homes in Accra. That's actually true. Please find out from the gentleman in the studio. Notes, the elevation of Accra is 61 meters and the sea level is 61 meters. Where is the water expected to flow without flooding?
So I'm sure he's referring to the low-lying areas because some of the catchments will start from Ebri.
Okay.
Or, for instance, starts from
Ebri.
So
okay.
That's how it is. Yeah.
But again, to his point, this flooding, this issue, there was a newspaper article from the 60s floating around the Daily Graphic where they were talking about the floods in Accra. So it's been a perennial issue,
Accra, that is the nature. It's low-lying and it's surrounded by the Ekrapin Range and all the waters that flows down will want to find its way into the Atlantic. So Accra, that is why naturally Accra has 9 drainage basins. Right down to Sakumo. Accra has 9 drainage basins because a lot of water flows through Accra. But with urbanization,
it's been exacerbated.
Yeah. There are a lot more people in Accra now.
Can I also add that flooding has always been with us, and naturally we gain from flooding because it brings down rich nutrients, and that is where we have our sugarcane. And there was this local food we call brobe. I think it's
brother of cocoa.
Yeah, the brother of cocoa. It's called brobe. I think it's getting extinct because we are using the wetlands. So people would habitate the flood zone. The river will also have a flood zone, and this is where when the sediments come, you go and plant your sugarcane, brobe, and the rest. Then when the waters are coming, you go upstream. So we have the floods. So it's not a new concept that we say that we live with the floods.
Right.
Yes.
But we have to manage it because right now the effects are devastating. With all the enhanced remuneration given to our CEOs, Less output is our returns. Ghana can only work again when non-politicians work. Our attitude towards obeying the rules must be looked at, which we've talked about earlier, and this is from Nakbanduri. And finally, we have no excuse for the perennial flooding of Accra. The cause of problem is known. Institutional failure is simply the bane of flooding in Accra. Address how building permits are acquired and half of the problem would be solved. This is from Ohene Edu. So I wanted to take us to a story maybe around 2015 from former President Kufuor, where he indicates that while various governments have acted with the interests of the people in mind, what is lacking is a coordinated and sustained effort at development, not only in flood management, but in all other facets of national growth. I wanted to get your reaction to that.
Well, I mean, that is the way to go. Governance is a continuum. So for whatever interventions or infrastructure we put in to alleviate or mitigate against flooding, it shouldn't stop when there's a change in government. So once we are able to do that, I'm sure as we continue to develop, then certainly we'll be reducing the problems gradually. Unless we do that, it's going to be a challenge, yes.
So, Mr. Ayata, I'm going to take you a little bit out of this conversation because there are some issues that underpin what is happening. So there are comments about the kiosk estates that are cropping up all over, which are also having an effect on what is happening. So I wanted to get your reaction to that.
Yeah, like most of these like kiosk estates are unapproved and the locations are even unauthorized. And then because they don't have basic amenities and they generate a lot of filth. And most of these things find its way into the drains. These are the areas where, these are informal settlements. These are the areas where people dump refuse into drains. Believing that the flood waters will wash them to wherever we cannot tell. So when we are able to read, like we started by saying that this is also as a result of the influx of a lot of people from around, everybody coming to Accra.
Exactly, which goes a bit to unemployment also because, yeah.
And then housing, the housing deficit, housing deficit in the country, all contribute to this kiosk estate that we have, because it's cheaper. And I can show you that there are people who work in formal sectors who are even living in these kiosk estates because they cannot afford to pay rent. So if you are able to deal with this, I mean provide employment opportunities in the informal sector for a lot of these people, and people are able to, I mean the accommodation, be able to improve the housing sector, the deficit that we have is reduced. These kiosk estates will be reduced, and then it will go a long way to mitigate the flooding that we have in the city.
So we talked earlier about national policies. The issue of plastics in our system is also, because it's not biodegradable, you know, it's also a huge issue that we are facing. The sea area, when you're seeing floods, you know, there's always some plastic, whether it's the black plastic bags that are sold all over by the street hawkers. What can we do nationally about this?
Well, plastics, and now we have something we call microplastics, and these are small pellets that are getting into the sea and the fishes are consuming. So our fishermen are now going to sea and they are bringing plastics back, and these freshwater bodies that are around the sea are also habitat for some of the fishes where they spawn. So it's actually creating a problem whereby there's a reduction in fish catch, and it might not be just pest crawling alone, but because we are degrading the habitat, I mean ocean animals to spawn in the freshwater bodies around there. So we should have We should stop. We should stop it. I mean, there are alternatives. When you are going to shop, you can carry your bag along with you, and the packaging too. You should minimize it. You buy some porridge, they will put it in another rubber, give it to you another plastic bag. All of these things, we should have a national policy that will dissuade people from doing that. And we shouldn't be afraid of the lobbyists and the people who are in that industry, you know. People in that whose industry is there, because the impact on the environment now is severe. So we should confront it head on.
You know how to balance it, you know. If we want to ban plastics, the impact, loss of jobs, livelihoods, and so it's not going to be. Growing up, we used to paper bags.
Exactly, paper bags.
What happened to our paper bags?
Yeah, and in some countries now you bring your own bags to the grocery store
just
because
abandoned paper bags.
Yeah.
Now we use those days we used to buy wache in leaves. This is everything is plastic.
It tastes better. You know, but I did want to say sometimes attitudinal change is because to keep doing that is expensive. So, you know, there's some countries where to use plastic is very expensive, and therefore it discourages the use, because it's very difficult to probably ban something, but attitudinal change is always easier sometimes to actually make the behavior expensive, and then you actually reduce people who are interested in the behavior. But we've talked about solutions, but I wanted to ask you a final question: how we can move from coping with the floods to adapting to it, because there are some areas that are flood prone areas, so they are in it. So how can they move from coping with it to really adapting to it, those in the Salem Down areas, what have you, until a national agenda is done to mitigate the floods?
So, well, you know the flood water level in your homes, so you should make sure that you start lifting all your precious items above the flood waters, the level that you see that is marked on your wall. You should lift them. Then I'm sure you should pay attention to the announcement from the meteorological services. If there's a need to move to a higher ground, you do that. It might mean that during the rainy season, you should find a new way of living, where you will not keep all your precious items in the environment. If you have a relative somewhere, you go and keep those things over there, then you'll be able to adapt to the situation, because that's
also it starts from, we need to develop above flood levels if we want to put up structures. That's why I talked about using professionals. You have to develop above flood levels. Those who have already developed, they should ensure that the drains, especially the tertiary ones, the ones in front of their houses, are always clean. To make sure that it can hold waters, they should desilt them. And then those who pave, if you go to certain holes, you have tiles all over. And there are regulations. That's, I think, about 38% of, there's a percentage portion that should be left green. If we do all these things, we'll be adapting to the situation. The rains will come, the waters will flow, but then we'll be safe.
And so what out-of-the-box idea would you have, outside everything that we do in Ghana? What other out-of-the-box idea would you have to mitigate this issue?
Well, I would say that soakaway is common in our homes, where we discharge wastewater into it. If your land area is able to infiltrate water, you can pass through some of the rainwater into the soakaway. Yes, it's possible. It's done. Yes, it's done. It's one of the methods we use for source to reduce flooding at source. And it's part of the train that I talked about, what is called the SARS train. SARS is Sustainable Urban Design Systems. So those waters can infiltrate, then you are reducing volume and delaying time. So we should be looking at volume downstream that will go downstream, and the time that is going to go downstream. These are the two things we should think about all the time. And the engineers and the professionals in the built environment are quite aware of it, except that we have not had a coherent policy to push it. But I think now is the time for us
to do
to start,
so. Okay, I think we're running out of time, but
I think that you said it all. Most of the floods in Accra start occurring after prolonged rainfall. We've had so much infiltration that the grounds are already saturated. So if we can increase infiltration, it will reduce flooding.
okay, so we'll give you 30 seconds each for your final comments, final thoughts.
Well, floods, it's something we have to live with. We should do all our best to minimize the impact if you are living upstream, that's on a hill, and let your neighbor be your neighbor's keeper by keeping your surroundings clean.
Yeah, I'll also add that those who live in flood-prone areas are already aware that their areas are flood-prone.
Right.
They should listen to weather warnings, and then once they realize the warning comes, they should make sure that valuables are placed high and documents are kept in polythene so that when they fall in water, they will not be destroyed. And then in case they are trapped, they should call the emergency hotline 112.
Okay.
And there will be teams dispatched to rescue them.
So I wanted to end with the President's words. We will ensure that these directives are complied with. I have established a monitoring unit and they will be reporting directly to me on the progress of the implementation of these measures. I am putting all MMDCEs on notice and will be held responsible for any that results in damage as a result of the flooding. Thank you all for joining us on tonight's Talking Point. I'd like to extend a special thank you to my guest, Mr. Richard Amo Yate, Director for Inspectorate at NADMO, and on my immediate left, Ms. Engineer Francis Mate Okanse, Environmental and Water Resources, Ghana Institute of Engineers. I'm Dr. Nim, and this has been Talking Point. Thank you so much for sharing your Sunday with us. As always, good night, good luck, and please be and take care. Till next week.
My name is Hope. I am a survivor of child trafficking. Years back ago, I was staying with my mom and a certain man came from nowhere, and then he told my mom that he wants me to come with him so that he will take me to school. The man told me that I'm not coming to go to school, but I'm coming to fish. I was diving inside the lake, riding the boat, removing fish with bamboo. They will beat me and then throw me inside the river, and I'll swim back again. And they are just beating me. I was there one day, and then the policemen came, and then they rescued me. So now I'm free, and I want to tell all the stakeholders that there are more children that are there. They are suffering. They are suffering than I have suffered. They should help them out.
This is a humble plea and call to you out there that child trafficking is real and it's ongoing. It has affected and destroyed lives.
Somewhere in Ghana right now, a child has been taken from home to be exploited as a slave. Somewhere in our airports, a woman is being trafficked to another country, exploited. Somewhere around you right now, human trafficking is happening, but no one deserves to be taken advantage of because of their vulnerability and predicament. No one deserves to be trafficked. Everyone deserves a good life devoid of oppression. Trafficking in Ghana is a communal problem, and together we can put an end to it.
We all have a responsibility to ensure that this menace is eradicated in our society. Now, if you're out there and you hear of a juicy trip to Dubai or elsewhere, details sketchy, or some work at the lakeside, please, let's cause for alarm.
If trafficking in Ghana will ever be brought to an end, each of us has a role to play. It begins with us. Let's be guarded against the tricks of traffickers to exploit people. Let's be on the lookout for anything that looks like trafficking. Let's support the police and other stakeholders